Hey everyone, this is Audencia, and I'm going to be talking to you about Pedagogy of the Oppressed, and this was chapter 2 of the book that we were assigned. And this chapter pretty much focused on Paulo Freire's concepts, and excuse me if I'm mispronouncing his name, but on his concepts of the Bencan education and its alternative, the problem posing method. So I'm going to begin by first talking about banking education and what it means. So banking education is again a term used by Paulo Freire in which he describes and critiques the traditional education system. So the name refers to the metaphor of students as containers into which educators must put knowledge. So again, this is a student-teacher relationship in which the teacher is seen as a narrating subject and the patient listening objects are the students. So unfortunately, education is suffering from this narration sickness, and it's not okay because by following this student-teacher relationship, we are not allowing our students to think critically or to problem solve. We have this idea that we as the teachers have all the knowledge and the students are obedient objects that are just supposed to be fed this information and not question it, just take it in. So again, the teacher's task is to fill the students with the contents of his or her narration. So whatever knowledge they believe they have, they're supposed to transfer it to the students. But again, the students aren't supposed to question it. They're just supposed to take it in as being true. And so this just pretty much promotes students to record, to memorize, to repeat. They don't gain any deep knowledge because we aren't teaching them to critically think. We are teaching them to just memorize. So then, banking education, according to Paulo Freire, mirrors an oppressive society because in an oppressive society, the oppressed are taught to be obedient, complacent. They're taught to not question. They're educated this way because then if they question, then there's this radical movement, and then those that are on top are not going to like this. And that's exactly what this banking education is doing. So then this goes on to, again, support that teacher-student relationship that where the teacher is the one feeding the knowledge to the students. So the teacher's job is to only teach, the student's job is to only learn, where it should be a partnership between students and teachers. But that is not what banking education says to be correct. The correct relationship between a teacher and a student should be that the teacher is the narrating subject and the students are the patient listening objects. So what banking education is doing is taking away the right of people to think for themselves, to think critically, to problem solve, because all it's allowing to do, just as this picture shows, that know how to do a multiple choice test, know how to do a fill in the blank questions, true or false. These type of questions don't require critical thinking. They require you maybe to read from a textbook and answer the questions in the back. I mean, this is stuff that you can read and memorize and copy, but this is not going to allow for people to be able to think for themselves and question whatever they think is wrong, which is what we should be educating our students to do. We should be teaching them that they need to think for themselves, that if they see something that is wrong, and even though they're being told is right, hey, it's okay to speak up. It's okay to question it. It's not okay to just be passive and live by everything we are told is correct, because the world would be, it would be something else. So again, the teacher cannot think for his or her students, nor can he or she, impose their thoughts on them. It's not okay for us or for anyone to impose our beliefs on someone else. We need to be open-minded and be willing to listen to others, but not necessarily impose what we think is right to others, because what we might think is right might not be right for someone else, and that's okay. But that's why communication is key, and communication can hold meaning. It'll through communication, excuse me, can human life hold meaning. And I think that's very important because through communication we are able to respect each other, listen to each other, and understand each other, value each other's different opinions. And that is, at the end of the day, what is important, what we should do. But in order to do that, we first need to go against that banking concept of education that only serves the interests of the oppressors. Excuse me. It attempts to control thinking and action. It leads men to adjust to the world and inhibits their creative power. Again, controlling thinking, that's not okay. We need to let people think for themselves. So those of us, like myself, who are truly committed to liberation must reject the banking concept in its entirety, adapting instead a concept of men as conscious beings. And this is where Freire talked about the problem posing education, which is what I'm going to talk to you about next. So the problem posing education, in the problem posing education or method, the teacher is no longer merely the one who teaches, but is themselves taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. I don't know if that makes any sense, so let me explain. This method allows for teachers and students to be both teachers and students. So teachers are not only teaching, they are also willing to learn from their students. And same with the students. The students are obviously learning from the teacher, but they are also teaching their teachers in the process. So again, in the problem posing method, the students are no longer docile learners. They are now critical co-investigators in dialogue with the teacher. So in this problem posing education, people come to see the world not as static reality, but as a reality in process, in transformation. So something that they're not looking just at the past, they're looking at the present, at what can happen in the future. They critically think about others, they're problem solving, just like the picture shows. So again, problem posing education affirms us as beings in the process of becoming, as unfinished. And this incompletion and this awareness lies in the roots of education as an exclusively human manifestation. The unfinished character of man and the transformational character of reality necessitate that education be an ongoing activity. So I took that from this chapter. So what this is pretty much saying is that is the importance of education, that we can continue learning, that what we are taught today, it doesn't just end there. We should always be learning. We should continue to learn. So now that I've given you a brief overview of what banking education is and what the problem posing method is, I'm going to show you an interview. Well, not show you, it's just you'll hear it, because I interviewed a teacher, or I talked to a teacher about this and their thoughts on it, and she doesn't necessarily like to be photographed, but she is a big advocate for women's rights, so I used Rosie the Riveter as a picture. But what I found interesting, I'm going to add this just because I found it very interesting, she doesn't like being photographed or shown pictures because she wants to be heard, not judged based on her appearance. And usually she says that when people see her, they automatically ask her what she is, and by that I mean ethnically, and she doesn't appreciate that. She would rather you just listen to her and take that in rather than have to look at her, because she doesn't believe she needs to be seen in order to be heard. But so let me pause this real quick. Okay, so I'm sure you've heard as an educator of Paulo Freire's concepts of thinking education, and I just wanted to I was wondering of your thoughts on that, and if you think it still applies to today's school system and in our schools, if from elementary through graduate school.
Okay, when you're talking about the education system, I believe it applies more to the K through 12, not so much in graduate school, because once you're in graduate school, you want your students to critically think. You want them to incorporate the critical thought and also to go outside of the box and also challenge the status quo. So that happens in graduate school. But when you're in K through 12, there's always been this figure of the teacher who sends the message to the student and the student learns. Now, if I think it still applies today, yes, it does. We can see it in the classrooms in how sometimes we give out a worksheet and we expect the student to do it. They don't really ask questions. They just obey because that's how they've been taught to do. If you challenge the teacher, you are called out on it and said that you are causing problems, and often results in being sent to the principal. So the students that don't want to be sent to the principal and want to pass on to the next grade or pass on to the next level, whatever it may be, do not question your authority. And so this is how the system has worked and gone back and forth.
So going off what you said, can you explain to me what you do in your classroom that goes away from this concept of banking education and moves more towards the problem posing method?
Yes, absolutely. For me, it's very important for students to critically think. I really want them to challenge the status quo and to think about how when something is said, is not necessarily true. For example, when I was younger, I was taught about Christopher Columbus, and they painted him as this very just man who did this amazing thing. But once upon reaching college, I learned that he was actually not very nice. And so what I learned in K through 12 was different than what I learned at the college level, which was when I started to use my social change and my social justice view. And so therefore it's important for students to challenge what they hear and to make sense of the world how they see it, and how through a critical lens. It's important for students to be creative, to think outside of the box, and to go and research and find out what they want to know from others' perspective and not from what they are just being told.
So that's very interesting. I completely agree with you that we do need to educate our students to become critical thinkers and not just go along with what they're told.
Exactly. One of the things is that I'm truly passionate about social justice. I really want students to understand that diversity is beautiful and that we come from different backgrounds and that we can make social change. And one of the things that I think is needed, especially in the high school setting, is this form of cultural diversity in the curriculum. For example, in U.S. history, we learn history through the American ways and the American views. However, because our schools are so diverse nowadays, it's not inclusive of our population. There's students who are Latinos or students who are Black who don't necessarily find themselves being identified through the classes offered in a high school. So I think that in order to reach social justice and incorporate social justice into the classroom, we have to also be more cultural sensitive in our curriculum. Maybe incorporate ethnic studies into the high school setting, where students learn about their ancestry and learn about different cultures and see how diverse we are, or also incorporate college prep courses such as psychology, child development, or even sociology, so that students can get a taste into how there's other disciplines and other things that have to do with education, and that it's not so structured, so that we can incorporate social justice into our curriculum.
I actually love that you said that, because it actually puts pretty much into practice what the chapter was about him saying that people are not objects in the world, but they're part of the world. So by you talking about social justice and incorporating it into the curriculum and talking about relating this to students, it's allowing students to see themselves as being part of the world and not as just being objects, taking all this information in. So Any final thoughts?